Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday stream. Good Sunday morning to you. Good morning, Sunday morning. Hope everyone's doing well. We are back again with Abolish the Police, or the End of Policing, how reform doesn't work and what we need to replace it with, or something to that effect. This is, if you couldn't tell from the title, Part 2. Part 1 had, a land acknowledgement, and then about a half an hour's worth of telling us the problem. And what was the problem? Well, in summary, because you'd have to listen to it for yourself, police are not police. They are violence workers. Police are simply the personal army of politicians who use the police to solve all social problems while taking all the money that could be spent on other solutions and using it to develop real estate. Now, you might think I'm kidding in that summary, but that's a lot of the major points that our speaker made over the course of that little bit that we listened to last time. So we're going to continue because, like I say, the first 20 minutes or so of the original talk or the lecture was our speaker, a professional professor of sociology who spent 30 years, he said, dealing with law enforcement and criminal justice issues while seemingly not having a criminal justice degree or a law degree, even though this is being sponsored by the University of Illinois Law School, telling us the problem. And that is police are being burdened with solving all social problems, from homelessness to addiction to mental illness to school issues, and it's not working, if you could believe it. And so hopefully we're going to get to his offered replacement for what police do otherwise. Because like I say, our speaker isn't talking about simply reforming the police or trying to delegate different things to different departments and the police are still there. He's talking about abolishing the police, ending policing, totally, because reform doesn't do anything. Okay, so with that as preamble, a few hellos, and then we'll get right into it. Let's see, I got to scroll up a little bit here. Matt Barnes, Mike R., Jamie Melquist, Zach Osborne, Wade Waleson, Dr. Keeve, Ryan R., Corey Suzuki, Check Your Logic, Decode, A Scanner Daftly, The Magister. Who else is here? Electric Amish, Funtime Bats, Twisted Skipster, Chicago Mike, Bruno Montiero, Sabian 187, and Data Wasteland. Good morning to you all. Hope you're doing well. All right, so I'm going to get right into it. I have jumped a few seconds back from where we left off last time just for an overlap. He was talking about, and I might be repeating what he's about to say, essentially saying that politicians are making the police responsible for all social problems. The only solution is to craft interventions that are made up by care, compassion, and solidarity rather than coercion and violence. Very big terms, no specificity. That they need to create mental health intervention teams. And I've done a TEDx before that talked about mental health intervention teams. And I think that was in Colorado, I think, Denver, something like that. I wonder if you'll bring up that example. And in that TEDx talk, I said, yeah, having some kind of, collaboration between police and some mental health professionals, designated cars that have police and a mental health professional sort of as partners in specialized units for when those situations come up and there is some room to maneuver. That doesn't necessarily sound terrible, but he's not talking about collaboration. He's talking about elimination of police. So anyway, I will stop my pontificating on that and continue. So we did leave off at 23:28 on the original talk. I've backed up to 22:39, if that means anything to anyone in the future. And here we go.
Instead, we should look at the kinds of social problems we have, take immediate steps to ameliorate those problems, through interventions rooted in care, compassion, and solidarity, rather than coercion and violence, while we work on making bigger structural transformations.
And as I probably said the last time as well, all right, give me the specifics. Those are big, marquee terms: care, compassion, solidarity. Don't know what that means. Changes in the structural this, that, and the other, such as?
We need to get police out of the mental health business. Between 1.25% of all people killed by police in the United States are having a mental health crisis.
Uh-huh. And are they being killed because they're having a mental health crisis, or because they are endangering themselves or others primarily? The way he phrased that, if I didn't say it bugged me the last time, and I'm sure it did, it still bugs me.
Because we've systematically defunded our mental health infrastructure and then turned the problem over to police. We need to create high-quality, community-based mental health services, non-police crisis intervention teams, to actually deal with people as human beings, not as criminal legal subjects to be neutralized.
And again, I can't remember exactly what I said at the end of the last stream on this. I'm sure I'm probably repeating myself to a certain extent, but you don't know the circumstances of a crisis until you arrive. So sending untrained, unarmed mental health workers to crisis situations is not a good idea. At least not all by themselves. Because a mental health situation, or a person with mental health issues in crisis, is a chaotic situation. Can be. You don't know. You have to be prepared. And mental health workers, without any way to defend themselves or defend others, going into a mental health crisis where someone is calling for assistance. Remember, these things only happen when somebody is calling for help, right? And so either you have someone who doesn't know this person and just sees someone out of sorts, or you have someone who does know this person, has a certain level of tolerance for this person's behavior, and has gotten to a point where they feel they need assistance. Okay, this is not just I'm having a bad day and then the cops show up and shoot you. Now, this is someone who has been called on because something is out of the ordinary. Mental health intervention teams sounds fancy. I don't think it's a good idea.
Cities are doing this. Denver recently released the results of the first 6 months of their new STAR program.
Aha, yeah, this is the, that was the thing that I did the TEDx on. The lady was talking about the STAR program. Again, where they have a police officer and a mental health worker in the same car, and they have these specialized cars, a handful of them across the city or across the area, that when you have some foreknowledge of the situation, you can call upon this person or this car to show up and to try to handle the situation.
That replaces police on mental health crisis calls. They did not request police assistance in a single incident.
Oh, wait. And that was the other thing too. Yeah, they did have, that's what it was. I apologize. I'm just remembering now. They did have a specialized team of only mental health workers to show up. Only mental health workers to show up. But even in that presentation, I seem to recall there was some missing information. I don't have it at the forefront of my mind right now. Maybe he'll get to it. Let's see. Let me get back over to the chat real quick. Thank you, Matt Barnes. My wife was a community health nurse. She dealt with a couple sketchy mental health situations. Protocol was for her to call social services, who called the police. Yeah, because you don't know. It's not a matter of, someone's having a mental health crisis, let's have somebody with a gun there. The problem is, a police officer, they only have so much information that they get from either, the 911 caller or the family member or whatever else. And depending on what the report is this person being violent? Does this person have a history of being violent? If they're just depressed, if they're thinking about hurting themselves or something else, maybe there's some leeway there. But a lot of the situations, you get a call from somebody who's just like, I remember there was a video where somebody at a restaurant called on some guy who's just wandering around in the parking lot mumbling to himself. he called the cops and he said, I think this guy's got a problem. I don't know what's going on. The cops show up. They try talking to the guy. The guy pulls out a knife and charges at the cops, and he gets shot and killed. It's like, what do you do? I mean, obviously this guy was having a mental health crisis, but the cops didn't do anything violent to him to begin with. They just came up to talk to him, and that was it. And it's like, oh, well, if someone who hadn't had a gun on his hip had shown up, the guy wouldn't have charged him with a knife. Well, you can't know that. So you're going to send somebody unarmed up there to talk to the guy if he was getting ready to stab somebody because he's completely out of his mind? I mean, should he be vilified because he's mentally ill? No. But if he runs up to somebody with a knife, what are you going to do? That's the whole thing. It's kind of like you don't know until you get there. You can't say for 100% that it's going to be a completely benign situation depending on the circumstances. And so the fantasy world of, oh, we're just going to send people out to mental health calls. Well, if you know it's a mental health call ahead of time, it's a rare event. Sometimes you have no idea. Anyway.
They're diverting a significant number of 911 calls, and they're saving the city of Denver millions of dollars. The Cahoots model in Oregon.
Oh, yeah, Cahoots. I did a video on that, too. Boy, oh, boy. I've just got a library of different pieces of information in my head now.
It's been around for a number of years. They have much more robust data, tens of thousands of calls. Police are asked to assist them in less than 1% of all calls. They handle now 20% of all 911 calls, and they're saving Oregon about $10 million a year in this small area of Eugene and Springfield and some surrounding communities.
I just find it odd that he's talking about money. I thought we were supposed to be talking about saving lives, because if police are violence workers and these guys aren't, then I would assume the numbers you would bring up is the number of police shootings in Eugene have gone from X to Y and thus down since this team started, or something like that. Is he going to bring something like that up? Because so far he's talked about the number of calls handled and the amount of money saved. But I thought the point was saving lives.
And that doesn't include the savings of emergency rooms and jail time. That's just in direct costs of policing.
Okay. And maybe that's good. I don't know. But what about police and what about incidents of police violence, right? Let's just call it police violence. Have those gone down in both cities or both territories?
This can be done. We could get police out of the schools and off college campuses.
You could do that. Do you want to do that? Are there no legitimate situations for police presence at schools and colleges? I mean, I keep hearing about on-campus violence and on-campus sexual assault and things like that. Do you just want to remove police from those situations? Thank you, Zach Osborne. Yes, Scribe. The mentally ill person that stabs people should be ostracized. Tired of giving crazies this weird pass. The mentally ill person that stabs people should be ostracized. Okay, well, Zach, I like I say, when it comes down to it, is that person a villain because they are mentally ill? No. If they charge at somebody with a knife, they are a danger to someone's life, and protecting life sometimes means tragic things happen. So I'm not quite sure what you're getting at there. Yeah, maybe I misunderstood. And if you have a follow up, you don't need to put a super chat in there. But maybe I misread that.
We could actually look at what's driving harmful behavior by young people and develop strategies to address it.
You mean like involve the parents? Or take a look at what's going on in the home life, that kind of thing. If you really want to get to the root problems of things, children really only have a few places where they get their, let's say, marching orders for behavior. So we talk about family counseling or something.
We have millions of kids that go to school with school police and no counselors of any kind, no school nurses, no assistance of any kind for these young people when they're in crisis, except an armed police officer.
Really? No school nurses, no school counselors. There's only cops and teachers. Armed police and teachers. That's it. Really? I'm pressing X to doubt a little bit. Let's see. And Zach again. Yes, the person who attempts to stab another person is a villain. I don't care about their mental health. Well, in the moment, no. Okay. I mean, in the moment, you have to preserve life, you have to preserve safety, and so on and so forth. Like I say, I mean, a lot of this stuff can only be discovered in the aftermath of a thing, and that's the problem. That's the problem with what he's suggesting, is that in the moment when police arrive, they have they don't have any kind of like omniscient sense of who this person is, what their triggers are, what their problem is, or anything else. They've got a call of a disturbance, they've got a call of someone acting bizarrely or whatever else. They show up, and then who knows what happens after that, right? It's a roll of the dice. Is it going to go well? Is it going to go badly? You don't know. But it's not, in my mind, worth putting someone who has no training and no ability to defend themselves or anybody else into a situation where you don't know what the outcome is going to be, because someone who is mentally ill, even if you know ahead of time they are mentally ill, is not necessarily a stable situation for somebody who's trained in mental health in a crisis situation. And that's really the point, crisis. A mental health professional in a crisis is not necessarily the best solution. As a supplement to policing, as a supplement to law enforcement, who has the training and the tools to defend people, maybe. But as an out-and-out, no. Does that make people who are mentally ill inherently villains, inherently evil? No. But like I say, it's not about whether they're good or bad people, whether they could be talked down under different circumstances or not, and so on. It's very pragmatic. That's what makes it tragic in a lot of these situations. It's not that somebody's necessarily, I mean, if they're not in their right mind, legally we don't hold them responsible for their actions after the fact, if they live most often. But that's beside the point. If someone comes at you with a knife, it doesn't matter what their mental health situation is. You have the right to defend yourself, and police have the obligation to defend themselves and others. That's the tragedy. That's also the pragmatism. I'm not quite sure our speaker understands that. I wonder if he's ever gone on a ride-along, or if he's ever watched the body cam footage of police officers trying to talk down someone who's obviously in crisis, even if they know ahead of time they have a mental illness, and then things go sideways. Seems to me he's thinking of a very, very pie-in-the-sky kind of notion.
This is perverse. This is perverse. It is the criminalization of a whole generation of young people. And even for those young people who are not a source of problem, who don't come to the attention of school police, they are going to school in an environment where they are told their fellow students are a threat, and the way we deal with threats is through the criminal legal system.
The criminal legal system. I think he might have said this last time too. There is a push to start changing the terminology from criminal justice system to criminal legal system, because there is no justice in our system, or the system does not guarantee justice. You're seeing this a lot lately. I think there was it Portland or Seattle or something, was outlawing the phrase in its public departments or something. Interesting. Also, if there's a cop at your school, you're being criminalized. Yeah. Okay. If there's a cop at your school, you're being told your fellow students are a danger. Right. Sure. Okay.
This is inculcating a deeply conservative Manichaean worldview that I think is harmful to democracy.
What? Okay, a police presence in a high school is harmful to democracy. Okay, hey, I'd be more than happy to have cops out of the schools, you know? And there are a lot of schools that don't have cops there. Why are the cops there in the first place? Are they just being put there out of thin air? Without any instigation whatsoever? Without any cause for concern whatsoever? If you want to talk about root causes of things, okay, tell me why, or give me an example. God forbid you give me an example of a school that has a cop in it that is unnecessary, right? There was no reason ahead of time to put a cop there. There was no concern. There was no prior event. Tell me what that is. Show me a school where a cop was put there just to have a cop there, and tell me about the bad outcomes. I'm willing to listen to that. You just saying so doesn't sell me.
We need to get police out of the drug business. We've had this war on drugs for over 40 years in its modern form. No lives have been saved.
No lives have been saved. Well, that's a broad statement, isn't it? It's very bold to say. No lives have been saved with cops involved in enforcing drug laws. Okay, I totally believe you.
No one has been prevented from getting drugs.
No one has been prevented from getting drugs. Really? How do you measure that exactly?
Anyone in the United States can get any kind of drugs anytime they want them.
No. Okay.
That's because the war on drugs was never about public health or public safety. It was a rancid politics of racial dog whistling. It was part of a strategy by the Republicans to convince white Southern voters who had historically been in the Democratic Party to switch to the Republican Party after Johnson and the Democratic Congress votes for civil rights legislation and dismantles formal segregation.
The war on drugs was a protest against the civil rights movement. Thank you, Chicago Mike. I'm making word salad on the bingo card, even though we're not playing bingo. That's fine. That's fine. Yeah. Now I keep the bingo card specifically for TEDx's. I mean, with a presentation this long, I'm sure we could fill out the entire card either directly or abstractly, and that would be no fun. The thing is, it's a race with a TEDx, right? Can you get a whole card filled out in 10 or 15 minutes? I appreciate it, though. Okay, so the war on drugs, don't get me wrong. The war on drugs has had many problems over the years. Many problems, many contradictions, many hypocrisies. This sounds like a conspiracy theory, though, for the most part. And if you want to see, like, there's a great documentary. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's called Cocaine Cowboys. There's actually a couple of different versions of it. Like, they made one documentary, and then they made sort of a follow-up that was using a bunch of the unused footage from the first cut of the movie that tells a whole different set of stories. So much stuff going on. And the sequel was, it was okay. But the first one definitely, and its little follow-up supplementary one. You want to see what the drug wars of the 80s looked like, and the massive amounts of death and despair and terror that took place just over the drug wars in Florida specifically. Yeah, the police were fighting a losing battle. It's true. But if they didn't do anything, how much worse would it have been? Hard to say. But it wasn't exactly just a nothing problem, and it wasn't just about racial control or something. You want to see who was profiting back in the 80s in Florida? Take a look at that documentary. It was very diverse, let's just say. Thank you, Matt Barnes. This guy is just wandering into balls made of steel territory. Just don't kick him in them, though. Yeah, okay. We're still not getting to the solution. He's telling us how police fail on every level at every point in society. He's still just telling us about the problem. And now we're moving on to the drug war. Okay. When are we going to get to what you replace them with? You talked about the STARS program in Denver. You've talked about cahoots in Portland, but only on the most cursory level. How would you institute those things widespread? How would you phase out police in total from these different parts of our society? Right? What do you replace police at college campuses with? If, as I've been told many times, there is a scourge of sexual assault on college campuses, do you not want police or law enforcement of some kind nearby? What are you going to do about it? How are you going to solve the problem?
And Nixon says, hey, guess what? Republicans are going to be the new home of racism. The Democrats sold you out, and the way we're going to do that is through the war on drugs.
Nixon said the Republicans are going to be the new home of racism. That was the selling point. I'm not sure we're dealing with an honest narrator here.
How do we know this?
Mm.
Because people on Nixon's staff have come forward over the years who were in the meetings who said this had nothing to do with public health, public safety, it had nothing to do with drugs. It was about racism.
Okay, who said that? And for all I know, he's telling the truth. I don't know. Who said it?
And we need only look at the implications.
No. Implications? You just said there were no implications. It was explicit. There's nothing implied. You just told us that Nixon's staff specifically know that it was about racism. There's nothing implicative about it. Is there? What?
Where the overwhelming majority of people in prison in the United States for drugs are black and brown. There are no buy and bust operations happening on Wall Street, even though we know drugs are everywhere on Wall Street.
There are what? Drugs are everywhere on Wall Street. Oh, okay, I'll entertain that. Okay, when? How? If there are no buy and busts on Wall Street, okay, how do you know drugs are everywhere on Wall Street? I mean, are smuggling operations taking place on Wall Street? Maybe they are. Are there no drug busts on Wall Street? Has no one who's ever worked for a Wall Street brokerage ever been busted selling or buying drugs or in possession of? I mean, what? I don't know what this means. Thank you, Matt Barnes, again. Sources familiar with the matter. Come on, Scribe. Yeah, I know. And like I say, maybe he's right. Maybe he's talking in summary. I don't know why he's talking in summary since he's got an hour and a half to this. But specificity, details, just telling me these things are true and not backing them up. And when are we going to get to the offered solution? Please.
Because it's not about that. If we were serious about improving public health and safety, we would get the police out of the drug business and turn it over to public health authorities.
You want to put gang wars over drugs over to public health authorities? Okay. You want to put tracking down and disrupting meth creation and distribution and the kinds of things that happen to people who are on meth, you want to turn that over to public health authorities? Really?
That's what Portugal has done. They got rid of the narcotics units. They decriminalized all drugs, and the public health indicators are better.
Wow, that sounds miraculous. You'll forgive me if I don't believe in miracles. Apologies to the 1984 hockey team or whatever.
Voters in Oregon recently voted to do the same thing.
To
decriminalize drugs and turn it over to public health authorities.
And that happened so recently, you can't possibly have any numbers to say whether that's been a good thing or not.
And to get police out of the drug business. We need to do that for sex work. We need to do that in relationship to homelessness. And we need to dramatically shrink the scope and intensity of policing and demand that government provide real solutions to our problems, that they provide people with basic medical care, basic housing, high quality education.
Yeah, because we can do all of that at the snap of a finger, right? We all have the resources, the money, the know-how, the infrastructure to just make that happen. It's just going to happen. It's also interesting to me to hear someone who is so vehemently opposed to Republicans and conservatives and so on and so forth, who is at the same time so pro deregulation. I mean, I just find that a very interesting contrast. Thinking on Vitae Rex solutions, the war is not meant to be one, scribe. It is meant to be perpetual. Well, if this guy is going to have any credibility in what he's saying, and I know it's a long stretch at this point, he's got to give us at least the notion of what he replaced it with. And I'm not talking about these abstractions of mental health crisis teams or this, that, and the other. If you want to remove police entirely from the equation, you're going to have to address those situations that are the most extreme. Okay, I've gone over this countless times in presentations about restorative justice. Okay, where we want to have a community-based situation to bring peace and understanding between the victims and the offenders and so on. Like, okay. So, in order to try to convince me, whether it's restorative justice or abolishing the police, you need to tell me, all right, what do you do with the next Ted Bundy? What do you do about the next Dylan Roof? What do you do about the next Bernie Madoff? And on and on and on. If you have no police, if you have no law enforcement, what do you replace those things with that will still be able to address a serial rapist or even just a serial burglar? Like, what do you do? You have to give me the solution to the most extreme example if you're going to convince me that you can remove police in totality. Until he does that, he's just talking nonsense. Is there a place for alternatives or diversionary programs at the lower levels of crime? Certainly. I have seen good arguments for that, and there are things in practice that deal with that. I got no problem with that. But we're not talking about alternatives to policing. We're talking about eliminating police. So if you're going to propose the elimination of police, you can't just talk about, oh, they're not good at handling mental health issues. I'll grant you that. They're not good at handling school issues. I'll grant you that. They're not good at... Yeah, you're right. The police are not there to solve problems. They're there to enforce laws. Okay? You know, if they can prevent problems from happening in the future as a result, great. But their primary duty is to enforce laws and keep the peace. If you're going to take them away, how do you compensate in the worst possible scenarios? Now, thank you, Mike R. Again, all this stupidity is mind-numbing. It's not, okay, and I'm a benefit of the doubt to our speaker. It's not entirely stupid unless or until he fails to provide an alternative. You know, and that's what I'm waiting for.
This is what makes communities safe, secure places, not having an armed police officer on every street corner. I know that the University of Illinois is involved in its own internal conversation about what to do about campus policing. And once again, we hear the same kinds of reforms being trotted out. Well, we'll try to better professionalize the officers, give them some sensitivity training, perhaps. We're going to expand the scope of policing by giving mental health counselors to the police department. Well, this is exactly the wrong way to go.
Okay. You brought up a specific territory and example. Finally. All right. The University of Illinois are going to start doing these reforms, make policy changes. But that's the wrong way to go. Okay. So your better solution is?
The university needs to instead ask itself why it has turned problems over to police to manage.
I think by saying, at least in part, and again, I don't know all the details here because our speaker won't give them to us. If the college is bringing in mental health counselors, is that or is that not a concession to the argument that police are not necessarily geared to handle every situation? Is that or is not that not evidence of the college being open to delegating certain situations to people other than police? Am I wrong there in thinking that might be an indicator?
The history of campus policing is actually rooted in the politics of suppressing student activism.
The police are there to oppress student activism. Okay. Were these activist situations wherein the police were called in, were they violent by any chance? Or were they there as a precaution in case violence broke out? Are we going to go back to the protests of the 60s or the 70s over the Vietnam War?
Not in questions of public safety for students, faculty, and staff.
Can instances of quote unquote activism and protest, can they lead to violence? Can they? If they can, is there or is there not a need for police and law enforcement to be at least present? Or alternatively, might I suggest the presence of police and law enforcement to enforce the laws of free expression in protecting activists and protesters their right to act? Doesn't it go both ways? Or is that not a possibility?
The vast majority of professional, uniformed armed police forces is in the wake of the liberation struggles of the 60s and 70s.
How could I have possibly guessed?
To more efficiently and effectively suppress student activism.
Boy, oh boy, in student activism these days, it is so oppressed. You never see student activists anymore. You never see protests on campus because the police show up and just kick them down because they're protesting, and only because they're protesting.
And then a patina of public safety is added to this. But my sense is that what the University of Illinois police are doing primarily is policing the community outside the university. Your sense is that your oppression sense? Were you bitten by a radioactive protester? Like, what are you talking about? They're not managing the problems of the university itself. One of the things we know about crime, so-called crime on college campuses, is so-called crime? Oh. That it is an internal problem. Oh. It involves members of the college community. The college community? You mean youths? The two youths? So what, the college community should police itself when, I don't know, I'll bring up the most extreme example I hear all the time. If there is a sexual assault on campus, should the college community be responsible for dealing with that? Engaged in property theft, property destruction, and sometimes intimate partner violence, sexual assaults, date rapes, things like that. Okay, yeah, those are internal concerns. So those things do not necessitate a police response? Policing is not particularly effective at addressing a lot of that. Okay, so even though theft, property destruction, sexual assault are problems on campus, police are not effective at solving any of that. Okay, so since they're not effective at solving it, just remove the police and let it... What? And you can just look at the numbers. They don't catch a lot of people, and when they do, it doesn't really address the problem. Okay. All right. I'm holding myself back slightly. All right. So what do you do instead if someone reports a rape on campus? Who should this person call? Who should the rape victim call from the college upon their having been raped? What exactly?
Dare I wish that you give us an alternative? Thank you, Matt Barnes. Oppression, man. Oppression does whatever a pundit can. Is he nuts? You bet, bud. He has protester in his blood. Oh, radioactive protester. Thank you, Matt Barnes. Please, at least tell me you're going to give us an example of what you would do instead of police in the occurrence of a campus rape. And this is what I was talking about. Okay, he's brought up, at least in this instance, a worst case scenario, a high crime and misdemeanor, right? A rape on campus. Okay. The police aren't there. There are no campus police. There is no law enforcement to arrest this person or find this person or nothing else. Okay. So you do what?
We need to engage in broader cultural changes that address the misogyny that drives a lot of harmful behavior on college campuses.
Right, because girls are never bad. Right.
We need to look at the economic security that some of our fellow students experience.
We need to give students money. Okay.
At my own campus at Brooklyn College, we have students who are homeless. We had to create a food bank on campus to address the profound economic insecurity of some of our students. And this was even before COVID.
And that resulted in a lack of need for police?
Policing can't fix those problems.
Policing is not meant to fix those problems. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I said in the last one, police ultimately end up wearing a lot of hats, right? Outside of the actual job of policing, law enforcement, and so on, they end up being ultimately a jack of all trades. But they are not there to solve those problems. To facilitate solutions, perhaps, to direct people towards help and organizations that do those things, certainly. Police are not there to solve them. I don't quite understand where our speaker's coming from with this belief that any reasonable person thinks that police are there to solve homelessness, to solve hunger, to solve mental illness. They end up having to deal with the consequences and the collateral damage of these things, yes. And as a result of that, they ultimately have to deal with possibly trying to direct people, when, feasible, to organizations, programs, or solutions or resources that may help to address those things for those people when they come across them. But I can't think of a reasonable person. I can't imagine a reasonable person who sees the police as the solution to all of society's ills or has the expectation of such. But all the same, okay, you created a food bank on your campus. All right. Therefore, there are no more crimes on campus?
Let's figure out what's really driving problematic behavior and develop real strategies to address that, instead of imagining this fantasy world in which police are hiding behind every bush to catch the bad guys who are preying upon us.
So, you hate the fact that there is an armed police officer on every corner. You hate the fact that police are just crawling all over educational institutions and criminalizing students. But it is a fantasy world to believe that police are around everywhere to solve these problems. I think you might be in your own fantasy world thinking that we have laws for no reason. I've said this countless times now. Laws are a confession of the inherent fallibility of human beings. We would not have laws if people were perfect, or if there was an expectation that people would eventually be perfect. You have to strike a balance here. Taking away police is not striking a balance. That is upsetting whatever balance could possibly be achieved. What are you going to replace them with when it comes to campus rape? Who does the rape victim call if the campus police are gone? If the police in general are gone? Who is going to track down and find and arrest the rapist? You don't get to bring up that example and not address what you would do instead. Oh, the police don't usually catch those people, so what's the point? Oh, okay. Okay. That's it? Police aren't perfect, therefore just throw them away?
This is not what police do. This is the fantasy of television. And we need to implement public safety initiatives that aren't rooted in punishment and violence.
Such as, give me a public safety initiative that addresses campus rape. I am all ears. You brought it up. What is it?
Thank you.
But that what? Okay, we still have an hour or so left to go on the original recording. That is your presentation. Now we're going to move on to question time. That's it. You give us a half an hour of complaining. You give us 2 examples of active initiatives in different states that may or may not actually be reducing police violence, which seems to be your major concern. You bring up campus rape after I brought it up earlier, but you don't address what the solution would be, if not to have some kind of law enforcement presence, either at the ready or within response time. And that's it? Really?
Thank you so much, Alex. That was so great. And I
No,
really appreciate.
no. You are not being intellectually honest if you listen to that and say that that's great. That's not great. That is, at best, your opening paragraph of your essay. Okay? And maybe the first part of your body. That is not great. That is whining. That's it. No. Come on.
The clarity of your analysis and all of the kind of receipts that you're bringing.
What both the receipts. The receipts. Okay. The STARS program in Denver and the Cahoots program in Oregon. That's it. Everything else was an abstraction, a claim without evidence underneath it, and a generalization of conspiracy theory and just hatred of police. That was not receipts. That was not clarity. That was a very verbose tantrum without anything else to back it up or to bring up any exception. What? Are you kidding me, lady? Really? Thank you, Matt Barnes. I knew it. You knew it. We all knew it. Problems must not be solved, so I can keep grifting off of them. Wow. It is a sad thing to say that with 30 minutes at hand for this speaker, I have heard much more convincing in relative terms and more detailed arguments in TEDx talks. All right. Well, maybe we're going to get to question time. Maybe we'll get into more details now. Maybe.
That moving things out of policing into other more appropriate agencies, it benefits everyone, even people who aren't necessarily targeted by police. And
that was not the point of this discussion. That was not the point. That was not the title of this discussion. Delegating people and situations to other authorities, other management situations, other organizations to try to help where police cannot is not a new concept. It's been going on forever. We are not talking about the delegation of responsibility for social ills. We are talking about the elimination of police. Reform isn't going to work. Police must end. That was the title of this talk. No. No, 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 no. What you're talking about is reform. Our speaker said that reform is a failure and that policing must end. So, no, you don't get to make that move here. Thank you, Chicago Mike. What alternative universe made that great? I don't know. I do not know. Is it the one where Superman crash landed into Russia? I don't know.
The way that many disenfranchised communities who are subjected to organized abandonment would be.
Organized abandonment. Please explain that one. Well, if we had the bingo card right now, I'd be circling buzzword. I hadn't heard that one before. Organized abandonment. I'm gonna have to look that one up.
Okay, so we have a number of questions that have come up.
Thank goodness.
Into our chat. So I'm just going to go ahead and give you some of these questions.
Boy, I wish I was there for this live. Boy, oh boy, I wish I'd caught this live.
So Candace Livingston asks, as we imagine and work towards a society without policing, prisons, and surveillance, how can we transform the Police Training Institute while policing is in the process of being abolished? So I'm not sure if you know this, but UIUC has its own Police Training Institute, and it very much has this it leans into the narrative that we don't do warrior training, we do the kinder, gentler police training. So how can we transform the Police Training Institute at UIUC into a space to promote transformative justice and equity?
So basically, how can we slowly neuter the police force down to eventually where they become so ineffectual that people will agree that they're useless and then just abolish them outright? Is that basically it? Transition them to being utterly ineffective so that you can justify arguing for their elimination? That's what I heard. I don't know if that's what you heard.
Well, I'd like to see some evidence that this training works, because
you would like to see some evidence, would you? Well, you know what? You're absolutely right to ask for evidence. You're absolutely right to ask for facts. You're absolutely right to be given some specificity on the argument. You're right. Golly gee whiz. Isn't that a great concept? El Professorino.
My reading of the literature is that there is no such evidence, that this is all smoke and mirrors. This is trying to imagine that policing is something that it isn't. It's trying to imagine that we can just turn police into social workers and community organizers by training them to be more sensitive, to more attuned to community concerns. But that's not the nature of that institution. Police are violence workers.
Boy, all right. You can take the police training out of the police, but you can't take the violence out of the cop. Like, okay.
And that is the basic mission. Not that they've created for themselves. It's the mission that's been given to them.
Right. Yeah. The mission given to them is to be violent. It's not that they're authorized to use violence when necessary. It's that their mission is to be violent. There's no hope for police officers. They can't be reformed. They can't be retrained. They can't be converted. They simply must be removed and eliminated altogether. No policing at all. If you happen to be sexually assaulted on campus, it's an internal problem.
Elected officials have decided that a whole set of social problems are now to be managed by police.
Really? Elected officials have decided this. So there are no other departments in any particular jurisdiction that handle homelessness or addiction or substance abuse or domestic violence or hunger. The police handle all of that. You've got the mayor's office and the police department. All right, you've got the governor's office and you've got the district, you've got the attorney general. That's it. There's no other department heads. There's nobody else doing anything. There are no other organizations, institutions, governmental or otherwise. None of them are there. Just the police. That's it. Okay.
But they don't give police the tools to actually solve those problems.
Okay, so the police could solve those problems if the politicians would only give them the tools to solve those problems. So it's not that the police can't solve the problems, it's they're not being provided enough resources to solve the problems, right? Except you don't want to give the police the resources to solve those problems because the police are just violence workers. So because they're not being given the tools to solve the problems, all they can do is shoot people. Is that it? If they had more resources, then they wouldn't be violence workers anymore?
Housing, medical care, social services, and all the rest.
Yeah, because when I break my leg, the first thing I do is I drive myself to the police department for medical care.
So this creates a dynamic that, in my view, inevitably leads to violence, discourtesy, and racially disparate outcomes.
In your view, you're not going to give us any receipts?
It's unavoidable.
Hmm.
So imagine,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
The case of Eric Garner. So here,
Okay, Eric Garner. Eric Garner, who was choked out by a police officer in the process of him selling illegal cigarettes, I think it was. And he was effectively suffocated to death on the streets in New York, I think, or Brooklyn or something. Anyway, yes. Okay, Eric Garner.
here's a person
Yeah.
who had tons of involvement with the criminal legal system, had been arrested.
The criminal legal system. Like I say, I brought this up before. Keep your ears open for that phrase. They are so trying to push this new phrase out. Right? It's not the criminal justice system. It is the criminal legal system, as in to say the legal system itself is criminal.
Dozens of times. It had no deterrent effect, did not solve his problems, was hugely expensive, and led to his death.
No, him being choked led to his death. Okay. Him being deprived of oxygen led to his death. He made the choices along the way to continue participating in criminal activity. Now, did the criminal activity he was participating in deserve death? No. And Eric Garner is one of those cases where it's like a cop made a very, very, very bad choice that day and did something unwise and dangerous and ended up killing a guy. But everything up to that point had nothing to do with that officer using a chokehold. Eric Garner's life to that point was a consequence of his own decisions. It's not the criminal justice system's fault that Eric Garner was selling illegal cigarettes on the corner that day.
Why? Not because the officers woke up that day and said, let's go get some black guy and kill him.
Are you sure? Because it sure sounds like that's exactly what you think police do, given your previous rhetoric.
I don't believe that for a second.
Oh,
I've never thought that.
really?
No, these are professional police officers who set out to engage in mundane, everyday law enforcement.
Uh-huh. And of course, everyday mundane law enforcement is committing acts of violence, right?
Which was someone's complained about someone causing a public nuisance, whether it was selling loose cigarettes or just hanging out there. Really, that was the problem. He was hanging out there.
Hanging out there selling loose cigarettes.
In an area that was slated for redevelopment.
Okay.
New buildings had been put in, and they didn't like seeing him out there.
Oh, okay. So simply his presence it wasn't that he was committing a crime. Okay.
And so they did what they had done dozens of times before. They were like, you're under arrest.
Yeah.
Whether you did something this moment or not, we know you do bad things, so you're coming with us.
Oh, that's how that went down to begin with, before the chokehold? That's how that went down? Okay.
And he said, no. This is
Imagine that. Someone not wanting to be arrested who's committing a crime.
not legitimate. Your constant harassment of me is not legitimate.
Uh-huh.
It's racialized oppression.
Uh-huh.
So he refused to comply.
Yeah.
And at that moment, all the non-warrior training, all the sensitivity goes right out the window. And he is managed through violence.
I would like our speaker to go on a ride-along with police for a week. Just a series of ride-alongs with police for a week. Pick your major metropolitan city. I really would. You know, if someone is refusing to comply with a lawful order, if there's a suspicion of a crime being committed or a crime afoot, if someone is trying to resist being questioned, etc., I would love for our speaker to see what goes down in real life. Now, is Eric Garner a very unique situation in the sense that someone died, you know, from a chokehold and everything else like that? Yeah. Caught on camera, right? Not really any sort of gray area as to what went down. Not a he said, she said. You can kind of watch it happen. But taking the worst outcome of a situation and saying that that is exemplative of every situation, that force is never justified, sugarcoating everything that led up to that point, including the guy's entire life, as though he was just a victim of everything. Are you sure you're being honest there, Professor? You're really bringing the receipts?
And they will use whatever violence is necessary to control that situation. Did they mean to kill him in that moment? I don't think so.
Wow, I'll grant you that is a major concession, because I've heard very different from a lot of people.
I never thought so.
Mm-hmm.
They would be very happy if he had survived that.
Yeah.
But there was also no world in which they turn around and say, okay, let's talk about this some more tomorrow.
That's how you handle crime. Just like, oh, we'll talk to you tomorrow when we can't find you, when you're going to do something else, if there's something else going on, etc. That's how you handle crime, you know. Oh yeah, all right. You don't want to come with us right now? Okay, we'll come back tomorrow. That's how you deal with criminals. If they don't want to stop doing what they are doing, and you ask them nicely, well, you just let them go. Okay. Thank you, Matt Barnes. Managed through violence sounds like a death metal song. You want to talk about somebody who's living in a fantasy world? Our speaker is. Really? You don't want to come with us? Okay, you're under arrest. No. Oh, all right. I'll see you tomorrow.
No, they're going to control and dominate that situation. And learning different holds and mindsets, it's all irrelevant in that moment. And that's the problem. Let's quit sending the police to manage the George Floyds and the Eric Garners.
Okay. Who do you send for the campus rapist? Just wondering. Who do you send for the... You brought it up. Who do you send for the campus rapist?
I actually want to kind of lean into this point. I'm seeing, my phone is blowing up. It appears that Chauvin has been convicted on all charges.
Oh, this was happening right then, was it? Okay.
For the murder
it can't be all charges. They're mutually exclusive. So
it can't be all charges. Our expert, everybody. Our expert. It can't be all charges. Our legal criminal justice expert, everyone. It can't be all charges.
they got to pick one. So
Okay.
Yeah, they got to pick one. They couldn't have convicted on all three. That's impossible. That's impossible. Search your feelings. You know it to be true.
Okay. It looks guilty on, well, I'm seeing some, okay. It does say it's all three, or anyway, he has been charged guilty, or he's been,
Okay.
yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this because
I love it. I really love it. Our professor expert, our 30 years in law enforcement studies and everything else, he's been convicted on all charges. Well, that can't happen.
because there are so many differing opinions on what something like this would mean. As someone who watched Laquan McDonald's murderer go to jail, and yet that has done nothing to change the behavior of the Chicago Police Department that regularly murders Black and brown people all the time.
Regularly murders Black and brown people all the time. Right, without justification, just cold-blooded, kills them for no reason. That's what the Chicago police do all the time? I mean, I don't know. Is that the case? All right.
And so I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about what does jailing and convicting a killer cop, what does that do for all of the kind of transformations that you're calling for that are necessary to get out of this kind of cycle of reform, relegitimacy, and the ongoing police violence? So can you say a little bit more about what this, what is the meaning of the Chauvin conviction?
I'm dying to hear this because this is so fresh, right? When this happened, it was right on the ball. This just happened. All right. So Professor Expert, Chauvin's been convicted on all charges. Oh, even though that's impossible. What does this mean for the longer struggle?
In this moment. Does it actually move us towards the goals that you're talking about, or something else?
Probably not.
Yeah. Convicting cops of killing people doesn't change anything. Okay. What will?
So, we're in this really no-win situation here where we've created a system where everyone understands that justice equals vengeance, that accountability is measured in years of incarceration.
Interesting way to put it, because that's how it all works, of course.
So now the question is going to be, well, how long is the sentence? Is it?
Yeah, okay. How long is the sentence? I don't know. Convicted on all three charges? What are the minimums for all three charges? Will they be consecutive or concurrent? I don't know. You tell us, Professor, since he obviously couldn't have been convicted of all three charges.
Long enough, right? So we got the conviction, but is it 10 years? Is it 20 years? Is it 30 years? Is there any number of years that will bring justice?
We only have so many avenues of justice on the temporal plane for wrongs committed, Professor. So I don't know. What is justice? And setting aside the facts of the case for them, let's just talk about a general case of someone taking someone else's life unjustly. Okay. What is justice for someone doing that? Well, if you go by the Bible, it's eye for an eye. You take a life, your life is lost. Okay. Is that life lost in an instant in an electric chair, or is it lost over the course of withering years in a concrete box? I don't know. Personally, I think the concrete box is more of a punishment than a quick death, but that's another conversation. You want to get into philosophical discussions about what equates to justice? We're going to be here a long time. Okay. But if you're debating or complaining ahead of time about how many years Chauvin might get, but you're also saying that justice equating to years in jail is somehow bad, well, then what would be the correct punishment for Chauvin? Because here's the question, Professor. If the criminal legal system is so unjust, if the process by which we punish people is so imbalanced and ineffective and useless, what is the correct punishment for Derek Chauvin? You want to throw out the entire system, okay? In your world, what would be the correct punishment for Derek Chauvin in this case? That'd be my question to the professor. If he could have everything his way, and let's say Derek Chauvin's conviction was the last conviction under our current criminal justice system, but he would be punished in our speaker's new perfect world, what would be the correct punishment for Derek Chauvin?
No. And is there any number of years that will fix policing? No.
Okay. So then just don't even bother? What should happen then?
So these convictions are incredibly rare. And when they do occur, the narrative that we hear is the system works. This was a bad apple who went too far. We dealt with him, and now we can go back to doing what we're doing.
Yeah, you're right. Nothing's going to change as a result of this conviction. You're right. And nothing ever changes as a result of any other conviction, ever.
And in fact, the whole idea of the conviction is another example of legitimacy seeking.
So he should not have been convicted? Or his conviction is meaningless?
Right? The police in Minneapolis made a conscious decision to let him go. And you could see this because they all came and testified against him.
A conscious decision to completely excoriate and vilify him. So that was meaningless. That's not indicative of any desire by the police to change or to distance themselves from his actions. I'm not going to start, arguing over the Derek Chauvin case right now. I'm just looking at what our speaker's talking about. So that was just pantomime. That was meaningless. Okay.
Usually they close ranks and they try to subvert the prosecution, but legitimacy could not be maintained in this case if they did that. So it was necessary to convict him.
Okay, so there was a certain level of cynical ass covering on the part of the Minneapolis Police Department. I can't say that's entirely untrue. I'm not a mind reader. But okay, you're going to say that it was all nonsense. It was all charade. Okay.
But there's no necessary reason to think that this will lead to any transformation of policing.
Well, why don't you wait and see? But you've already given up. Okay, so what should Derek Chauvin's punishment be? If Derek Chauvin is going to be put into the same system that you say is so unjust in its core, what would be the correct punishment for Derek Chauvin? Boy, I know my question would never have been asked if I had been at this thing live, but that would be my question here. Because if our speaker is truly sincere about his hatred of law enforcement and the criminal justice system as it is currently rendered in his perfect world for the crime of killing George Floyd, what would be Derek Chauvin's ideal punishment?
First of all, it's a mistake to think that we can fix policing by trying to reverse engineer a solution based on these very high-profile, horrific incidents.
Well, how do you learn from your mistakes if mistakes are not made? How does something evolve without a flaw being discovered? Laws themselves are a reverse engineering of current practice. What the fuck are you talking about? Pardon my French. Knowledge, learning things, correcting mistakes. These are all reverse engineering because we can only look back at what we've done and try to do better. What the hell are you talking about?
It's anecdotal. We come up with solutions that seem logically to fit, but actually have no evidence behind them. But also, the harms of policing are not limited to these high-profile incidents.
Oh.
A totally lawful, procedurally proper, unbiased, low-level drug arrest is still going to ruin some young person's life for no good reason.
Yes, we know You want to get rid of police. I get it. You desire this so badly that you can't even see the inherent flaws in your lack of a plan. So no one should be arrested for anything ever. Is that it?
There's no justice in it. The previous 12 or 14 arrests of Eric Garner brought no justice to anyone.
Wow. Why did Eric Garner have 12 or 14 arrests? Is it because Eric Garner, after each one, made a choice to continue behaving in a way that would lead him to being arrested? Now, some people are deterred from committing future crimes by being arrested, by being put in jail, etc. Some people are deterred from that. Some people choose to continue behaving that way. And lo and behold, they run into the police again, if you can believe it. Now, how do you want to address the root cause of that? Okay? If police are not there to address the root cause, and you know what? I'll grant you that. The root cause? Yeah, no. Police have to deal with the fallout of bad choices. So when are you going to tell us about addressing the root cause of Eric Garner's problem? What would that be exactly?
Even if they didn't kill him, even if they didn't injure him, right? So policing is producing harms and injustice even when they don't kill people. And so whether we get rid of qualified immunity, have more convictions of police officers, this is not going to transform policing in my view.
So there is no responsibility on the part of the person committing the crime at all. I mean, they're being arrested. They're being confronted by police. It's the police's fault that they got in the way of this person living their life. Is that it? Because that's what I'm hearing.
Thank you for that. It's so hard because when in the absence of any other kinds of state justice other than punitive justice, and if you are a community that is literally starving, you'll actually eat some poison because at least it's something.
Wow. Okay. So making more apologetics for crime. Every criminal is simply a desperate, hungry person that has no other option. Okay. Especially in your community. Not quite sure what that means either.
Absolutely.
And yet it doesn't advance like any of the goals that we actually want.
Absolutely. And we should not be in the business of like criticizing people for wanting that. We just have to say, look, this is not going to be enough. We have to talk about what real justice might look like.
What does real justice look like? How should Derek Chauvin be punished? Right? I mean, well, first and foremost, I don't know how Derek Chauvin could be punished at all if there were no police to arrest him or any laws there to sort of constrain such behavior. But okay. Again, in your perfect world, what does justice look like for Derek Chauvin? If not years in prison, what does real justice look like? You're going to have to define justice in your view because you haven't done it yet, but you need to if you're going to make an argument to the alternative. And it just, yeah.
You know, when you talk to victims and families of victims of serious crime, and you have real conversations with them over time, what they want is for this not to happen to anyone else.
Yeah, imagine that. So if you have a serial rapist, what do you do with that serial rapist? What do you do for the victim that says, I don't want this to happen to anybody else? Do tell.
Exactly.
And throwing 1 or 2 killer cops in jail is not going to accomplish that.
Okay, well, you know, so I've been told many times, and I'll confess it's probably true. Most reported rapes are committed by men, you know, but throwing 1 or 2 men in jail for rape isn't going to prevent that from happening again, obviously. I mean, it might prevent it from happening again from that individual you jail, but it's not going to prevent rape from happening again. So, the only way to make sure that rape never happens again is just to abolish men. That'll do it, right? I mean, if there are no more men, well, you can't have any more rape, right?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. There's so many questions and all of them are excellent questions. I hope we can get to most of them. I want to circle back to this issue of the kind of kinder, gentler police, right? I think that, even the Chauvin trial shows that cops know that they're in the midst of a legitimacy crisis and they're willing to make that kind of sacrifice in order to shore up the authenticity or the legitimacy of the force overall.
A legitimacy crisis or a vilification crisis? I mean, I guess they're kind of the same thing, I suppose.
And so Angela Ting asks, how can individuals and groups who are dedicated to defunding and abolishing the police take steps to resist the discourse around kinder, gentler policing that UIUC police and administration like to parrot?
Okay, so how can someone with one opinion avoid having to deal with a opposing opinion? Okay, do tell.
Well, I think we have to ask some questions about what is the function of this massive police apparatus that the university is spending huge millions of dollars on.
I don't know, preventing and or eliminating campus rape. We'll just take that one example, okay? Because you haven't addressed it at all yet. So that'd be my proposal, at least as one example. Okay.
Like, really, what is it accomplishing for us? And
well, I don't know. What is it accomplishing? I mean, you must have the statistics, right? You must have the campus statistics for University of Illinois about how many crimes they respond to, how many arrests occurred as a result of their response, on and on and on and on. All of that, I am sure, has been documented down to the nitty-gritty. So why don't you take a look at that? You take a look at exactly what the campus cops are doing, to what extent, and the volume thereof, and then you can come back and say, okay, this is what they are doing. Now, if you find that they're doing absolutely nothing, maybe you'd have an argument for eliminating them from the budget. Can you do that?
is this the only possible way to accomplish it? And to continue to point out, right, that policing is inherently dangerous. It's dangerous to democracy. It's dangerous to the well-being of individuals who are policed. It's dangerous to the well-being of communities that are over-policed.
Okay. Policing is dangerous to democracy. It's not that policing is a dangerous occupation. No. It's dangerous to everything else. I'm coming up on ending this stream, guys. I'm already at an hour and a half, just about, and I think that's a good place to stop. For the record, on the clock, we are at 42 minutes and 31 seconds of the original recording. If I decide to do a part 3, and I'm debating right now, that's where we'll start. Thank you, Non Vitae Rex. Equity is justice to these people, Scribe. Equity in all things, whether people deserve it or not, whether people want it or not. Disparate outcomes are inherently evil and must be eliminated. I would love to know what our speaker's definition of justice is. Okay, he hasn't told us. He would have to tell us specifically, even if he takes an abstraction, a murderer, a rapist, a serial burglar, whatever, an armed robber, whatever. He would have to tell us, what do you do in these situations? What do you do with people who commit these crimes? How would you treat Derek Chauvin in your idealized version of justice? You must have an answer. You've been thinking about this for 30 years, even though Derek Chauvin couldn't possibly be convicted of all 3 charges. That's not possible. All right. Well, I'll tell you, given the fact that we had his entire presentation as nothing but a list of complaints and a couple of sidewise examples of different programs being instituted, but nothing where police have been eliminated and how that went. I'm not quite sure what to say if there's anything else to go forward on this. Whatever questions he might be posed by the people watching this live, I don't know that he's got anything to say that we haven't already heard. And I'm most suspicious of the fact that nothing about CHOP came up. Nothing about Portland came up outside of the whole cahoots thing. If you want to see what society looks like in the absence of police, look at what happened in Seattle last summer. A 6-block some odd zone where no police were allowed in. The police were driven out. What a paradise that was. Were people taking up arms as vigilantes, kids getting killed, other atrocities taking place that probably haven't been recorded. Will our speaker have brought up any example where police have been eliminated, have been abolished, and the paradise that resulted? I would be surprised if he could, but he certainly hasn't. So, everyone, will I do a part 3? I don't know if it's worth the time of doing so at this point. I think we've heard every bit of rhetoric that our speaker has to give, and certainly in his some 30-minute long presentation, he didn't give us anything to sink our teeth into. Police are bad. The system is bad. The system is broken. It doesn't help anybody. Police don't do any good. All they do is violence. They're no good at solving society's problems. Politicians just use them as a shove-off for society's problems. We need to get rid of police. Reform is a waste of time. That's it. I didn't have to take 30 minutes to say all that. And that recitation of claims and notions is backed up by just as much evidence as our speaker offered. So, do you want me to finish this one off, as it were? Do I do it part 3 and just get through it all, or shall we call it here? I'm inclined to just let it drop here. Link to the originals in the description below if you'd like to hear it. However, if you are really wanting me to take a look at the rest, let me know in the comments. Let me know on Twitter, all that good stuff. I'll be paying attention. But all things considered, I think I'm going to draw it closed here, at least for now. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me for this one. It was, like the last one, a bit of a slog. A couple of entertaining points, especially with his whole legal analysis of the possibilities of Derek Chauvin being convicted of all 3 charges. That was my favorite part of the whole thing. If you'd like to hear more from me or Satsu 2 Cents, you can find the two of us tomorrow night, Monday night, on Satsu 2 Cents' channel at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for The Lords of the Night, where Satsu and I will talk about the news of the day, what we've been up to on the internet, news stories that you submit. I just switched those around, didn't I? And your questions and comments. Everyone, again, thank you for joining me. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do. Everyone who donated, thank you so much for your generosity. I really do appreciate it. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I hope you are all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon. And I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.